Welcome to Solutions Rising. I'm Rachel Branch, and joining me for this program is composer and artistic director of Floating Tower. This is a really very special program. Mr. Matti Kovler is with me, and I believe our audience, all of you, are going to be delighted with this program. Mr. Kovler has an incredible background, some of which is right here in the Berkshires. Welcome, Mr. Kovler. Matti, if I may. We usually start off the program and say, would you please tell us, share whatever you would like about your heritage and your background.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to have you here at the Chase House. And this is not your first time, this is not Rachel's first time here because she has a unique family connection to this very house that we're sitting in, as being a part of local Berkshire royalty. So,
you're very funny.
So, yes.
My great aunt.
That's
Dorothy
correct.
Gallup
And Dorothy Gallup owned
Sure.
Chase Hill after Mr. Chase's, and in fact, there's an interesting connection with generations of people who are local from North Adams. I am not from North Adams. I was born in Moscow, in a country that no longer exists in the Soviet Union, and I immigrated to Israel with my family in 1990. Where the rest of the Russian Jews were immigrating elsewhere from the Soviet Union just shortly before the Soviet Union collapsed. I grew up in Israel, and after my military service and after my bachelor's, I came to this country, which was already almost 16 years ago, to do my master's and doctorate in Boston and then moved to New York. And while I was in school, back in 2008, I was a fellow at Tanglewood. And this was my first introduction to the Berkshires and how I fell in love with the Berkshires.
This is stunning that you were at Tanglewood, and of course I started going to Tanglewood in high school, and it's a very special place in the Berkshires and internationally. So I was just amazed and loved to know that you were a fellow there.
Yeah, I loved Tanglewood, the whole experience there. And I also even more so than the music experience, although it was wonderful, I enjoyed the nature. It somewhat reminded me of my childhood back in Moscow. There were certain trees and certain kinds of nature, so it was an interesting experience for me. And then I kept coming to the Berkshires every summer. I worked with Tanglewood a few more times. 2011 I did my double bass septet there that was commissioned by Tanglewood for 7 double basses. And then every time I would go to Tanglewood, I slowly, I became friendly with many friends and community members around Tanglewood, some of whom are local from the Berkshires and some of whom have second homes coming from either Boston or New York City. And I loved the Berkshires, and we used to stay in Lee with a good friend of ours, and then in Stockbridge and West Stockbridge. And every summer we would also make the trip to North Adams, because that's where the cool galleries were and, the artsy kind of dingy atmosphere. So for me, North Adams was this beautiful, unexplored place that kind of visually resembles Tuscany because of the hilliness. I immediately realized that this was the most beautiful place in Massachusetts, just in terms of topography. And always in the back of my mind, I had the idea that someday I will hopefully be able to come back and hopefully also be rooted here in some way. Long story short, or a little bit less long, my group, Floating Tower, that I started 11 years ago when I was a composer in residence with the Elie Wiesel Center in Boston University. The group is mostly comprised of immigrant and refugee musicians. It just sort of happened this way. As a double immigrant myself, I feel particularly connected to the concept of being an immigrant or a refugee in this country and the whole floating phenomena of what it means to be a floating musician, which is not really rooted. Unlike you, for instance, who you traveled extensively and then 20 years ago you came back to North Adams where your roots are. I don't know where my roots are particularly, I feel very Israeli, but at the same time, I haven't been there for 16 years, even though my whole family lives there. I have a green card, and yet I don't feel fully American, And I was born in Russia, and Russian is my mother tongue, so it's a little bit more complex for me, and so it is for many of the other musicians who are part of Floating Tower. Some of them are from Israel, some of them are from Iran, Greece, Turkey, you name it. So Floating Tower became a collective from where we used to live back in Boston, and upon moving to New York, we started making immersive music theater productions, which is something I will tell you more about later. But essentially, my dream was for Floating Tower at some point to have a space to come in the summers and to do our work, to do productions, to perhaps do work with local community. In some way, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we achieved that. We used to come to the Berkshires. We were in residence with Turnpike. It's a wonderful sculpture park in West Stockbridge that is also quite new. It was started 7 years ago by a wonderful couple, Russian, Ukrainian, Jewish couple who has been doing fantastic work there at Turnpike. So we would come there in the summer and stay, but my dream was really to have a place of our own, in which we could accommodate musicians, also on ongoing basis, doing both things, doing our common projects, Floating Tower projects. And by the way, even though I'm a composer, I'm not the composer of all the Floating Tower projects that we do, because it's quite diverse. I sort of see myself as a leader, as an igniter of sorts, and as well as just residencies for artists coming and going. Chase Hill provided this opportunity. So where your great-great aunt once lived, now is becoming a space for music. We're very small. We are mostly privately funded. It's not, we don't get many grants yet, and we're not quite established in that field yet. It's all still very experimental. It's by invitation only. But in the past 2 years, we've been lucky enough to host many refugee and immigrant musicians, and also some visual artists, as you know, because you interviewed one of them a couple of weeks ago here on the Fresco project. And the artists come here, that stay here. We Airbnb some of the other properties on the hill in order to be able to house refugee artists here for no charge. They don't pay for staying here anything. It doesn't cost anything. But they do participate in some of the the chores, the communal chores, the gardening, painting projects, and so forth, and also make music.
Well, it's very, very interesting, because I've lived halfway around the world back, and I say I've been acculturated, and I think the more people are exposed to other cultures, this is really what the United States is about. So immigrants and refugees are very close to my heart, and I say at this time in my life there are no coincidences that I met you, and what you were doing, even with an Airbnb, finding ways to sustain Floating Tower for refugees and immigrants is really important. So I'm just honored that I met you, even as funny as the way we met by knocking on your door. As funny as it is, what an experience to meet you and Anya.
Did you ever tell your audience about how you actually came to Chase Hill?
Well, I wrote that piece that I sent all around, and I came to Chase Hill with a second cousin of mine because we wanted to look at Arnold print works. We wanted a picture, and it was snow on the ground, and we were trespassing, so we trespassed, and I thought somebody's going to come out here and either yell at us or shoot us, and I just knocked on doors, and you answered, and it was quite funny.
It was early morning. I was standing in my underwear in my own bedroom, and suddenly I see a pair of lovely looking, an older gentleman and a lady looking straight at me at my window. So it was very amusing, I have to say.
I wasn't looking at the window. My cousin was.
Your cousin was looking at the window. So, because we don't have blinds elsewhere in the house, because usually we're quite separated. So I found it amusing, and I went downstairs, and I realized that, we were dealing with North Adams royalty,
Really?
who we were honored to host, and then they came in and they got a tour of the Chase house and the wives' mansion and the property. And I should tell a little bit about the gist. I know that some of you who may be watching this are familiar with the history of North Adams. Some may not be from North Adams, but obviously Chase Hill Estate was built by Mr. George W. Chase, who has somewhat of a controversial, should I put it this way, reputation in North Adams, because he's responsible for the single event that in fact put North Adams on the map back in the 19th century, called the North Adams Strike, or the North Adams Scandal. And the North Adams Strike was specifically...
The Chinese workers.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
And the North Adams Strike was specifically cited by the United States Congress in their 1882 decision to enact the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yeah.
And in fact, 1883, because of that decision, the Congress also started building a wall on our border with Mexico in order to prevent not the Mexicans, but rather the Chinese from getting to this country through Mexico. So when we bought Chase Hill, we had no idea about all of this story, and some of you may know about the Chinese strike, but I will just, the Irish strike that led to the arrival of Chase's Chinamen, this group was called. But I will just briefly mention that Mr. Chase brought 75 Chinese strikebreakers here, who were mostly between the ages of 10 and 16, and they were greeted by an angry Irish, I don't want to say mob, but you know, they were unionized. There were workers who were very angry because they were unionized. It was one of the first union strikes in America, and the sculpture across the street from Mesmoka commemorates the union strike at the Samson Shoe Factory. So the Irish decided not to strike, and then following 1 month, it turns out that the Chinese boys actually mastered the production of shoes and did not need the Irish. So Mr. Chase simply proceeded to fire most of the other Irish workers, went to mainland China, coming back with 250 more Chinamen, so to speak.
These are ongoing horrific stories in this country as we try to become a democracy, not realizing, as I wrote years ago, the United States is not a melting pot. We are strong because of the diversity of our cultures. And this seems to be ongoing. And you know, at this point, you just keep speaking up about it, which you're doing right here. And you know, a little prayer here and there. But this is a wonderful representation of what the United States is supposed to be right here. So that's one of the fantastic things about meeting you.
Thank you, Rachel, and you're very kind to us. And what I should also say that, you know, we're not thinking in large terms. We're doing the things that we love. We enjoy it. We enjoy making music and creating a kind of a strange artsy commune in an old house, surrounding ourselves but by interesting objects and inspiring pieces of furniture that were kind of sourced out from Sanford and Kidd, teeny, you know, down the road, and books from Grover Atkins, you know, bookstore, and you know, and we're very privileged to be a part of this community, and we're very often asked if we are part of Mesmoka, even though Chase Hill has a direct relationship with Mesmoka just because of its history, because for over a century the Chase mansion and the wives mansion were occupied by the owners. At first the Chases, who owned the Samson Shoe Factory. Then when the Samson Shoe Factory burned, the Arnold Print Works factory was constructed. So the Gallops, you know, and your great-grandfather owned it. So for over a century, from Chases to the Gallops, and finally, you know, the Glickman Shapiras did not own Mesmoka, but for over a century, whoever lived on a hill owned the factory, you know, that we can see from this hill. So there is this connection. But in terms of institutions, we're not institutionally connected to Mesmoka, although we love, you know, taking part in the cultural offerings, and we're very friendly with many visiting artists who go there. But we're not a part of it. We are our own little independent bubble.
You're a solution. That's one to one together, all together. This is how I believe we solve problems, and we enlighten. And of course, music is just a fascinating part of something international that you don't need language for.
Music can be therapeutic, and music helps deal with trauma, as you know, and it helps. The feeling of being rooted is also helpful, and I think music is also, since music is a kind of a social glue that brings together people from different kinds of backgrounds. I think it works really well connecting regular people from local communities to something that seems very far, like refugees. And as an example, because music travels. There could be a melody that is common to one community that suddenly appears in a different community. And by the same token, there could be a Ukrainian melody that suddenly, and the Ukrainian melody, let's say from 200 or 300 years ago, as some of the melodies in our production that I will speak about. But some of these melodies, suddenly we find out that they have words, some of the words in Ukrainian, and suddenly you hear oy vey, radarida, oy vey. And oy vey is clearly Yiddish. It's not Ukrainian, but how did oy vey get inside a Ukrainian peasant folk chant? Because the Ukrainians and Jews interacted. There were, and in this, by the same token, many of the Ukrainian Jewish and klezmer music contains elements from Ukrainian folk music.
Sounds like the word okay.
Yeah, so music travels, and this is exactly what our production here is about.
Which are leading right into, because we've been talking about ancestors. So
that's exactly right.
You are the creator of a composition called Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. So I really am looking so forward to hearing you talk about this.
So first of all, thank you for giving me the honor of being the sole creator of this composition, but I'm not. I have to say that Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors is a combined project of many members of Floating Tower, of which I am a single member. So it's a group effort.
Thank you for clarifying that.
I just wanted to clarify this. It's not an opera that I composed and produced. It's a combined project that is built around refuting the notion that is unfortunately commonplace in this country, that Ukraine is somewhat of Russia's little satellite, you know? People don't know, or some people don't know much about Ukraine. Yeah. And so some people don't know much about Ukraine, so it leads to several kinds of misconceptions. It's very, we know that Putin came out with an essay titled "On the Historical Unity of Ukraine and Russia" back in 2021, before he launched his aggression against Ukraine, which is bizarre, because in fact there is no historical unity between Russia and Ukraine. You can argue there is some unity. There is also historical unity between Ukraine and Lithuania, or between Ukraine and Poland, or in fact between Ukraine and the Jews, or Ukraine and Greece. And while the first ever inhabitants of the lands that we now call Ukraine spoke Iranian dialects, so there is a unity between Persia and Ukraine. So and some of the ancient inhabitants included the Jews, the Greeks, the Tatars, and so forth. Half of Greek mythology, as we know it, is happening. People don't realize it. It's happening in what's today modern-day Ukraine. And Ukraine, Kiev, was the breadbasket for Athens, for instance, in ancient Greece. That's where the bread came from Ukraine to Greece. Oh. So it's interesting. So this production, Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, is attempting to refute this notion and to showcase some of the links between Ukrainian folklore and other cultures. And we learned about it from a very interesting series, video series on YouTube by Professor Timothy Snyder from Yale University, called The Making of Modern Ukraine, that has millions of views, and I highly recommend. If you're into history, and you don't have to be a history nerd, you just need to be a curious person, but it's, you know, I love these series, so I highly recommend watching them, and you will really learn as much as we did about the history of today's Ukraine. Now, personally, for me, Ukraine does have significance because all the four of my grandparents were born in Ukraine. Even though, yes, they were
really?
born in Ukraine, even though during the Holocaust they all escaped. So one side escaped to Siberia and the other side escaped to Uzbekistan. But of course, you know, if they hadn't escaped, like much of their other families, I would not be sitting here just because all the other Jews were murdered. So I have the Ukrainian Jewish heritage in my blood, and I remember my great-grandmother, Rezel, singing to us in both Yiddish and Ukrainian, which were her first languages. Yiddish and Ukrainian, and Russian she only learned much later. So Ukraine has family significance for me, personally. I have been multiple times to Ukraine, and last time was in 2017 when I worked with the Ukraine National Symphony on a large-scale concert event as part of their Gogol festival. And back then I got to spend almost a month in Ukraine, and I was stunned by the level of creativity, by the inventiveness, by the atmosphere and the vibe and the creative vibes of the people there. We lived in something that is called the Art Squat, where basically a bunch of artists occupied a semi-abandoned building belonging to an old film studio and made an art squat inside it. So each room, even though there was no running water, believe it or not, or electricity, each room became an installation, and they lived and created for months inside these half-abandoned rooms. There's a little, toilet outside, and if you need to go to the bathroom or some food, but they transformed this space into a magnificent alternate universe situation just by the sheer power of their creativity. So my impression, especially of the young Ukrainians, was one of great inventiveness, great energy, great creativity, and I was hoping before the war started to do more projects with some of our Ukrainian musician collaborators. Here comes the war, and incidentally, during the pandemic, we went through a process of reconsidering what life looks like, because during the pandemic also my agent in New York called me and she said, well, I don't know how to break it to you, Matti, but there's no commissions, there's no performances, there's no gigs, why don't you find something else to do? So this is why I decided to act upon the old dream of floating tower, and in my dream imagination I always saw something spooky on a hill because of the name, Floating Tower. So I saw something Victorian on a hill somewhere in Massachusetts, in the Berkshires, and so when I came to Chase Hill, I very quickly recognized Chase Hill as I just knew. It was sort of like a deja vu for me. So it all kind of clicked for me, you know what I mean?
Oh,
I
absolutely.
saw Chase Hill, the same house that your great-grandfather bought for his daughter, for her wedding. Yes,
I don't know.
William Arthur Gallup bought it for Dorothy Gallup Jones and her husband. It's in your book.
But I then went down to the Registry of Deeds and
much afterwards, but it belonged to Dr. Samuel Jones.
which doesn't surprise me. Arthur Gallup bought. I mean, there's so much real estate that he bought in the city.
Yeah. That's what
He's a great philanthropist.
At least that's what I thought. That's what I thought, that he bought it for his daughter and her husband. That's what So in any case, we're talking over 100 years after what happened with your great-grandfather. I come here, during the pandemic, looking at these houses that really were in terrible shape, I have to say, as you know. It was several years after the owner passed away, and, it's very complicated. And it's not only the history of Chase Hill, it's also the history of many other houses in North Adams, unfortunately.
Including the house I grew up in on Church Street. So this is one of the things that North Adams really has to pay attention to. And you are, what you are doing is one of the solutions of uplifting and sustaining and rehabilitating North Adams that needs to happen.
Look, we love North Adams, as you know, and it's not a secret that North Adams is already past the point in which people, because I remember coming here back in 2008 and 2010 and seeing the kind of desperation in the air and seeing the roughness, And it's not a secret that it changed. Some people say it's due to Mesmoka, and some people say it's due to pandemic, but of course, you know, when you see the revival of what's now going on in Main Street, on Eagle Street, and First Fridays, and how busy they are, and the Creep Crawl initiative that gets 50 or 60 people, you know, go through different houses of North Adams and explore, and the kind of community that is here. We often joke that we go back to Brooklyn to relax from all the action happening in North Adams. So, seriously.
Well, I call this a revolution of hope for peace with love. And you're seeing some of that creativity. It has to come locally from the bottom up. The North Adams that I grew up in is so different from the North Adams that I came back to after 40 years. So these are other conversations. But yes, you are, I believe that there is so much housing structures here that could be co-opted and renovated. I've talked about habitat for rehabilitation.
Absolutely.
It's not building new homes. There are structural homes.
And also many opportunities to also include people from other communities, especially refugees.
Absolutely.
Especially refugees who need a place to stay, and North Adams could be definitely more diverse, as we both understand. And
well, that's what I saw at my grandmother's house, the Flood House. It's my maiden name. They made 3 apartments for formerly homeless individuals. There's no, but there is no, the Lewison House, there's no reason why that can be done on a huge basis right here in North Adams, collaboratively. So that's a whole conversation.
Well, that's
in
a different
itself.
conversation. The collaborative homeless initiatives have a history of not succeeding in New York because, for instance, in New York, the idea of collecting all the homeless people in one place did not work out.
No, I wasn't talking about that.
Okay.
I'm talking about cooperative. When I'm saying collaboration, I'm talking about banks and governments, elected officials, housing, getting together, planning and zoning.
Mixed use is really the way to go, but that's a whole other conversation.
We're in the same place on that
conversation. But you know, in terms of refugees coming in, when we work with Berkshire Immigration Center, particularly our very good friend Luisa Folegati is kind of our link to the Berkshire Immigration Center. So when they wrote us about Anya, who you interviewed, who was a fellow at Mesmoka and is a wonderful textile artist from Ukraine.
I have to say, Anya Sobolieva. I think I might have gotten it right that
You've gotten it right.
And,
You've gotten it right.
I was just honored that she did a program with me. Really.
And she enjoyed it very much, Rachel. And your enthusiasm and kind of joie de vivre are very good for people who deal with trauma, because they realize that they're being honored, they're being seen. It's something very tangible. I don't know how else to explain it. You know, featuring somebody like Anya, who loses everything that she has back in Kharkiv and suddenly comes here to be with her daughter, who's a student at Williams College, Diana, and giving her an opportunity to showcase her work. Also, Mesmoka, the wonderful Irish fellowship program that they launched for in collaboration with Assets for Artists. You know, it's all the beginning of something that hopefully can grow even further. We hope that we can bring more creatives to North Adams and also creatives from other cultures. So in our production, for instance, I'm getting back to pitching our production. First of all, I should say that we spoke for a while and I haven't mentioned the date, so I should just say it for the records. If any of you who is watching this is in town or in the Berkshires on the weekend of the 4th of July, please check out the production of Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors happening at the Adams Theater, which is a different cultural institution, a significant one that I'm going to speak about in a second, happening on July 1st and 2nd at 7 p.m. There is all kinds of tickets, starting from completely free to, I think, $20, $40, and $75, and all the tickets proceeds are going to go towards Razom Foundation, which is R-A-Z-O-M, which is the leading foundation that to this day delivered over $60 million of humanitarian aid to Ukraine.
Ukrainian refugees?
To Ukraine, to specific families and businesses in Ukraine, helping not only refugees but also people who are in very difficult positions still living in today's Ukraine. for instance, I have a relative in Ukraine, and distant family relatives. She's living in Kherson, and I don't need to tell. I mean, and she's been without electricity or running water for the past several months. She cannot leave because she has elderly parents of her husband that she's taking care of. They are in their 90s. She's in her 60s, and she has no windows in her house. And recently, the recent bomb strike damaged a part of her roof. So these are very concrete stories of today's Ukrainians who desperately need the help. And even though with many delays, and this administration has been helping Ukraine, several very significant delays, everything is being delayed, but I'm not going to get into politics right now. But you know, Ukraine, besides the military, the much needed military aid in my opinion, Ukraine also needs a lot of humanitarian aid. So we are doing our small part in helping as much as we can. So the idea behind Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, beside the ideological idea, is also to be a fundraiser for Ukraine.
So we will be putting up on the screen the website for adamstheater.org, and that's R-A-Z-O-M,
Razom Foundation.
Razom Foundation, so you probably can look that
Thank
up
you very
also
much.
and know more about
so
that.
If you happen to have a lot of money and you want to contribute it to a good cause, please donate money to Razom Foundation for Ukrainian Aid and come to our performance.
And this is really important for me to highlight that for you.
Thank
and
you
that's
very
part
much,
of what I want out of Solutions Rising is obviously we want to help those most vulnerable and in greatest need. So, I mean, my soul weeps when I look at the stories on Ukraine and Kyiv and the towns and what is happening. I mean, I can't, and it's not just in Ukraine, it's all over the world. So many are suffering. But we do, each of us can do whatever we can do.
What the Ukrainians showed the world is a great deal of courage in front of a great foe, a great adversary. And, you know, for me, it's a privilege to be engaged with some of the Ukrainian folk materials just in this way. Even though I have to say, as a segue about the production I started talking about and I haven't finished, we're using Ukrainian folk music, as you know. And this folk music is happening in collaboration with a wonderful Berkshire-based video artist and videographer, sculptor and lighting designer, Joe Whitten, who I think most Berkshire audiences are familiar with. Even if you don't know Joe Whitten's name, you might have seen his work illuminating the Hancock Shaker Village, for instance, the winter installation. So he's very familiar. He's creating a lot of magic all throughout the Berkshires. So basically, when you come on July 1st and 2nd to the Adams Theater, you will find yourself transported to an ancient Ukrainian forest with colors and shadows, and then you will hear the sounds, you know, of some Ukrainian folk chants and pagan processions, and the folk chants are going to transform to be some other kinds of music, because the idea behind this project is that we want to show the links between the musics of not only Ukraine but also surrounding cultures. So for instance, you can have a Ukrainian chant in Ukrainian language followed by a Hebrew chant sung by Jews, Ukraine, followed by something Turkish, followed by something Lebanese. And we're using a combination of local musicians and also Ukrainian refugees. So you mentioned Bob Davis, who knows you from,
he's a sweetheart and an incredible musician. Yes,
Yeah,
he has done a Solutions Rising program about Middle Eastern music.
Right, and there are many links again, because beside being a wonderful oud player and multi-instrumentalist, who's also involved in Williams College Middle Eastern Ensemble, Bob also partially grew up in coming to this house, to the Chase house. He was friendly with the family living here, and his mother, Shirley Davis, is responsible for the renaissance of our entire neighborhood, of the Uno Park neighborhood.
The Uno and Park, also the creation of the
center,
Uno
the creation
Community
of the
Center, yes.
Community Center, and getting Mr. Wadsworth on board, and you know, so we're very thankful to Bob, his mother, and members of the community. Bob is going to participate in the ensemble as the oud player, as well as Rami Alassar also from Williams College, who's a phenomenal percussionist who during the pandemic also moved to North Adams, and now he works as a cook for Williams College, but he also teaches percussion and tabla and co-leads the Middle Eastern Ensemble at the Williams College. So we're going to try to bring the Middle Eastern musicians, our Floating Tower musicians, and a group of Ukrainians, as well as members from the Ukrainian Village Voices choir in New York City, who specialize in this kind of very sophisticated, hardcore Ukrainian folk music, you know, fully voiced. It's gonna be
I
great.
am so excited. I cannot wait to see this.
Plus local community members, plus teen refugees. I don't remember if I told you that, but we have 4 kids in the production who are actual refugees from Ukraine, who we were introduced to as part of our good friends are running a project called Lost and Found in New York City. And they produced a wonderful play with Ukrainian Ukrainian teen refugees that was very moving to us, and we're hoping to bring it to the Berkshires, and I know they're in conversation with Mass Mocha and perhaps the Clark also to showcase. So some of these teen actors are also going to be participating in our production. I'll tell you a little bit about Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, where the title is coming from. Some of you may be familiar with the film, but it's a film. It's an iconic film from the 60s by a Russian film director called Parajanov. Parajanov was called by Fellini the greatest living director of all time, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh,
and Fellini and Parajanov, in fact, had a letter exchange while Parajanov was in jail for homosexuality. Never mind. So Parajanov made this beautiful film called Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, even though Parajanov himself is Georgian Armenian heritage. This film is a kind of a Romeo and Juliet story situated in modern day, in ancient Ukraine. So it has a lot of ancient Ukraine in it, including the Hutsul tradition, but also some invented customs that Parajanov himself invented. And I'm saying that for a reason, because the goal of our production is not to imitate or replicate authentic Ukrainian culture. We're a bunch of international people, refugees, local North Adams community members from the age of 6 to, I don't know, 90, you know. So we're not attempting to replicate any of the Ukrainian or to engage in this kind of cultural appropriation. This is our inspiration. We're doing a fusion-based project. We're reimagining what this could have sounded like with influences from Ukraine and other traditions. And if I may, I can just give you a quick example of what I mean.
I was just going to say, would you please, I do that while I end this show without your playing a little bit, please.
So this is a melody. This is a melody called Oi Hayu Hayu, and this is one of the melodies. And you will hear how this melody, which is an ancient Ukrainian melody, becomes a chant, a Hebrew chant. Folk tune that is in 7/4. And then in our show it becomes connected to a Jewish psalm with Hebrew words from the Bible. From the depths I cry to you, O Lord, hear my voice, hear my prayer. And then from here it could become a Lebanese melody. Called Al-Asmar Al-Lun. And this is something that Bob Davis improvises beautifully on the oud. And this melody in turn sounds like another Sephardic tune. Savanu ve'otarnu kidvar Adonai. Savanu ve'otarnu kidvar Adonai. Oy ayu she'ayu Ukrainian zelen rozimayu Lubir divechinu sami dobre znai.
It's glorious. Oh, I just cannot tell you. We must be coming close to the end, are we, Dave? But 10 more minutes to go. I just am so honored, and I just can't believe we're doing this program together. This is just stunning and awesome, and I'm going to encourage everybody. I suspect this ought to sell out at the Adams Theater. So we do want people to go to the adamstheater.org. We will put that on the screen.
Thank you very much. And
The Razam Foundation, we will make sure we highlight contributions to the Razam Foundation.
If I may, I want to take a moment and talk a little bit about what's happening at the Adams Theater.
Yes,
Some
because
of you
that's
know,
been a great renovation and been going on for
it's
years.
not only a
so,
great, it's not only a great renovation, but it's just Adams Theater is a part of the renaissance of this area, really.
Yes.
Of the renaissance of the North County. I know many people are talking about it all the time because it's not a secret anymore that North Adams, and as well as Adams by extension, even though, but North Adams is past
they were
the
one
period.
city years ago.
That's right.
The
So-
1878, I think it's separated.
So, East Hoosac.
East Hoosac.
East
Oh,
Hoosac.
your
So-
history is good.
So I learned my history. So, but in any case, so Adams Theater is really the brainchild or the new version of Adams Theater, because it has nothing to do with, I mean, it has everything, both everything and nothing to do with the old, because Adams Theater is an old theater that many local community members still remember going to see a movie at the Adams Theater.
Yeah.
Celebrating Christmas, and yet this theater was kind of semi-abandoned. If you remember, there was so now there's a great deal of investment, of financial investment, and reimagination of what Adams Theater could provide to the community. And the person behind is Yina Moore, who I think you may have interviewed, and if you haven't interviewed her yet,
I have not, but I will.
So she's really one of the main change makers now. From the younger generation, from the generation of newcomers to the area who want to invest in the area both culturally and also financially. So she was able to get together a very impressive group of people. I'm very honored to be on her advisory board.
Beautiful.
And also a very impressive group of founders, and she worked very hard to get a lot of money to invest specifically in the community of Adams and in their theater. So it's really becoming a multifunctional performance space for different kinds of events, starting from community local events and to world-class music and theater events. It's really fantastic. It's not I mean, if you haven't been there, you have to go there, because it's not like there's one stage and sitting area and that's it. You know, everything is changeable. Everything is interchangeable. The stage is changing. The sitting is changing. The arrangement is changing. You can make a water pool inside. It's quite impressive, I have to say. And
I remember seeing it when it was all ripped apart. So I'm very
well,
looking forward to seeing it.
And it's not done yet. And it's not done yet. And one of the benefits of doing something in a theater that is kind of half finished is that we can get a lot more exploration time, and I'm very thankful to Adams City Fire Department for allowing the fire marshals to be present during these performances, even though, you know, because formally the theater is not finished yet, so there is a solution for that. So please don't worry, you're absolutely safe to attend the performance at the Adams Theater. And Yina Moore is behind some of that change.
I must meet her.
You definitely must meet her. And she's a part of the crowd of the new, younger people who have been coming to the North County and who want to stay here and who want to impact and make change.
We need intergenerational community members who are dedicated to being part of the community in many ways, and need to be welcomed and supported. And fundraising is exhausting and difficult work to do for this, but those are the substance of things that retain and save your communities.
Yeah, and it's true that there's a lot of there's also a lot of negativity, as you know. There's a lot of negativity, and it's not all roses at all, and it's often very difficult to bring change to a community who may not be interested in change. It's very difficult to convince somebody who knows that it's all difficult, and there is generational trauma in North Adams still. You know, many people carry the generational trauma of that it happened 50 years ago. Sprague Electric, half a century ago, there used to be something that was called Sprague Electric.
My grandfather was treasurer of Sprague Electric.
Right, so, and it's still, you know, 50 years went by, but the memory of this trauma of Sprague Electric leaving North Adams is still very much alive.
And they did a lot of damage in North Adams, and it was the largest employer here. But that's why you need multi-use.
Yes, but also the damage is, the trauma is sometimes inside. It's like, you know, I'm fourth generation past Holocaust. And I never thought about Holocaust trauma, even though I was born in Russia, I grew up in Israel, you know. But now, when I'm in my early 40s, only now I start realizing that the Holocaust, as far as it sounds, is still somewhat present, even in my life, in the life of my family, in the life of my brother, you know. It's just...
Well, I'm a crime victim, so I've been living with trauma for years and years and years. And so you have to be able to live with it, walk through it, and keep being positive, count blessings, and use every... I always say, I'm so blessed that I use every rotten thing that's happened to me. I'm able to use it in some way. And I don't think you overcome it. You live with it and try to thrive with the gifts that you have.
You try to make do. You try to make do with what you have and what you're given. Negativity is not going to go away. Difficulties are not going to go away. But hard work pays off. If you do work, it pays off. If you are willing to work on some issues, eventually it will pay off. I know...
and there's joy in the creation. This whole conversation is joy for me. This is joy, hearing your music. I can't wait until July 1st and 2nd. This is thrilling, absolutely thrilling. And this is so needed. It's so positive.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
It's so brilliant, I must say. You are so brilliant. And
you're so cute. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You're very kind, and I'm just I'm.
And I must say, the real royalty in the world for me are the refugees, and you and I will.
So coming from the North Adams royalty to the other royalty, I feel like I'm surrounded by different kinds of royalties. But with, you know, even if you happen to not be royalty, please come on July 1st and 2nd to the Adams Theater for Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, and please tell your friends to come. We're competing against multiple other cultural events happening in the Berkshires the same weekend, as you know. we're going to be the coolest event.
Yes, and this has to take top priority.
So
Everybody.
please come to our
really?
event.
Yeah.
And we also might be serving some Ukrainian borscht as well.
Yes.
It's to be
Knowing that
decided.
this beautiful event is going to help others is just so wonderful. And I'm just going to tell you, I will give you a moment for a last comment, if you would, please. And then, but I have to thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on Solutions Rising.
Oh, it's
Mr.
my
Matti
pleasure.
Kovler, I'm thrilled and beyond honored. I'm going to run out of superlatives for you.
It's my pleasure, Rachel, and it's always a pleasure to have you in this house. It's also your house.
Another chosen home. And if each one of us picked up one problem and solved it, imagine the incredible view we would all have of Solutions Rising. This definitely, the program that Matti Kovler and his team have put together, this incredible Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, is just going to be premier, an incredible event coming up in Northern Berkshires, and I don't think anything will be able to top this. And also knowing that it is going to support the Razan Foundation. And please look at adamstheater.org, and we expect you to buy tickets, buy some extra ones for somebody, for friends and family, and I hope you will enjoy the experience of what you are about to hear on July 1st and July 2nd. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.